CCJ's 1044 is brought to you by Chevron Dello Heavy Duty Diesel Engine Oil. Now there's even more reasons to choose Dello. Did you know that you could go green and still use your saddle tanks? We'll explain. You're watching CCJ's 1044, a weekly webisode that brings you the latest trucking industry news and updates from the editors of CCJ. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications so you'll never miss an installment of 1044. Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Jason Cannon and my co-host is Matt Cole. Going to zero emissions is confusing for a lot of fleets, and it's expensive for pretty much everybody. But your fleet can already go a little bit greener without spending any additional money, and maybe even save some money along the way. And you also get to keep using the diesel tanks that are already on the truck.
Renewable and biodiesels are two options fleet operators have to cut emissions without having to buy an entirely new truck, or even a different engine for a new fuel type. In fact, renewable diesel and biodiesel blends are drop-in solutions that allow drivers to pull up to the pump, fill up, and drive away like they normally would.
So renewable diesel is made around the country. There's around 2.4 billion gallons of it produced in the United States. We've got a large renewable diesel refinery in Geismar, Louisiana that will make 350 million gallons of renewable diesel next year. It's made from renewable feedstocks, things like used cooking oil, things like animal fat, things like distiller's corn oil, which is a byproduct of ethanol production. It's a straight drop-in fuel, no modification to the truck or any diesel engine is required, and it provides 100% Scope 1 emission reduction on CO2 for every gallon of number 2 ULSD that it replaces.
Blends are exactly what they sound like. Traditional diesel blended with some biodiesel.
Biodiesel blends are readily available across the country at many travel centers, typically in a B5 to a B20 blend. B5 means 5% biodiesel, 95% diesel fuel. B20 is 20% biodiesel. Those products have been in travel centers dating back to 2005, 2006. All of the leading travel center firms across the country are marketing those. There are state incentives in lots of places around the United States, particularly the West Coast and the Midwest. Those biodiesel blends tend to be very cost competitive with traditional diesel fuel. And once again, for every gallon of biodiesel that replaces a gallon of diesel fuel with those biodiesel blends, you get 100% Scope 1 emission reductions.
Finally, B100 is 100% biodiesel and contains no petroleum diesel in its formulation. It also requires some equipment modification to use it.
B100 is a bit of a unique technology platform. This is operating 100% biodiesel, 24/7, 365 in a diesel engine. So to do this, there is actually a slight modification that is needed to be made to the diesel engine. We do this in conjunction with a technology partner called Optimus Technologies. They have the ability to slightly tweak a diesel engine, allow it to run 24/7, 365 on B100. The B100, once again, in most states is very cost competitive with diesel fuel. It is not readily available at retail around the country as of yet. So we've really found this with federal and private fleets to be an opportunity primarily with bulk fuel. We will set up a B100 bulk fuel tank with a fleet, fill that tank with B100, and then they can fill their trucks directly from that bulk dispenser. The B100 to operate in diesel engines, it's basically the heating of the fuel in the fuel tank and the fuel lines. As it gets to January, February, and March, we get to -10, -20 in places like Iowa, where I live. You need to have that modification technology on the fuel tank and the fuel lines. The technology is pretty elegant and simple. The truck basically starts up on diesel fuel in the morning. Once the fuel gets to about 90 degrees Fahrenheit, it pulls from the biodiesel tank. The rest of the day, when you turn the truck off at night, it runs for 30 seconds to clear the fuel lines and the filters, and then you're ready to go the next day.
Emissions are just one of the benefits that comes along with renewable and biofuel. John tells us about the others after a quick word from 1044 sponsor, Chevron Lubricants.
We serve customers from Birmingham, Alabama to the Gulf Coast, so our people and our trucks are booked solid all day. There is no slack in our schedules. These trucks can't break down. I choose an engine oil that takes care of the number one issue with our engines, emissions, so we don't have to worry about DPF clogging. I choose the engine oil that keeps our trucks hauling. I choose Dello 600 ADF.
Some of the other advantages associated with renewable diesel, first of all, it's economics, particularly on the West Coast where renewable diesel is most prevalent, places like California, Oregon, and Washington. Because of the LCFS state incentives in place on the West Coast, renewable diesel has actually found a bit of a discount to number 2 ULSD. So that's always exciting. But what we're starting to see are some other secondary benefits, particularly in operations. There's about 50% less soot generated in renewable diesel versus traditional diesel. That was reflected in about 50% less regens. So we're seeing the replacement cycles for the DPF filters being longer. And we're starting to see data, just the engines are running cleaner and lasting longer on renewable diesel. So with the biodiesel blends, the B5 to B20. So once again, the economics are typically on a par with diesel fuel. That's why the travel centers are taking advantage of marketing the biodiesel in the first place. There's lots of fuel efficiency studies that have been generated over the years that are saying the biodiesel blends are basically on par with number 2 ULSD. That's a question that we get frequently. And then finally, there's a big lubricity benefit. There's actually no lubricity additive needed to be required to diesel fuel when you run a B5 to B20 blend. And we see this once again reflected actually a quieter and smoother running engine over time.
One of the biggest concerns with bioblends is something relevant as winter driving approaches: gelling.
So the biggest challenge associated with the biodiesel blends is dealing with the cloud point of the fuel. The fuel does gel at much higher temperatures than traditional diesel fuel or renewable diesel. And that has to be managed, particularly in the northern part of the country, the upper Midwest. It's relatively easy to manage. As I mentioned, it's typically B5 to B20 blends. B20 blends are commonplace in the summertime. We dial those back to B10 or B5 in the wintertime. The last thing that we want is any truck or any fleet to have any issues. B20 around the country works really well. Obviously, April, May, June, July, August, September. As we go into December, January, and February, once again, in the northern half of the country, that's where we start to dial our blends back. And actually, if we see there's going to be a huge cold snap where it's going to be, a polar index of minus 20, minus 30, we suggest to our customers that they go back to straight number 2 LSD for a short period of time before turning their blenders back on. The feedstocks or the ingredients that make renewable diesel and biodiesel are identical. It's things like used cooking oil, animal fat, corn oil from ethanol production, or soybean and canola oil. The difference is in the production technology. Renewable diesel is much more like a crude oil refinery. We actually use hydrogen. We crack open the molecule. To make biodiesel, it's a fairly simple chemical modification. But at the end of the day, the products are a little bit different. Renewable diesel at the molecular level is basically indistinguishable from number 2 LSD. It actually has the same ASTM spec. Biodiesel, as I mentioned previously, does have a bit higher cloud point than renewable or diesel fuel. That's the biggest difference.
A lot of trucking's transition to green energy is driven by subsidies, and that too is the case for renewables and biodiesels. But the good news for fleet operators is that in most cases, they don't have to deal with them. That's something for the refineries and fuel remarketers to handle and simply pass that along to the customers.
So federal and state incentives are a big part of the value proposition for both biodiesel and renewable diesel. There's been a federal incentive in place since 2005 called the Blender's Tax Credit. So Chevron, REG, and other biodiesel, renewable diesel producers pass this along to our customers. And then in addition, several states have state incentives in place. I've mentioned the West Coast already. California, Oregon, and Washington have low carbon fuel standards in place. A number of the Midwestern ag states have incentives. But at the end of the day, to the truck fleet, whether they're buying bulk fuel or whether they're buying at their local truck stop or travel center, all of those incentives are baked into the equation. So the price that you're paying on the pump, be it a B5 to B20, or if in California, if it's an RD 99.9 product, those incentives are built in. And for the most part, what you're seeing at retail is very, very cost competitive with number 2 LSD. The pricing, once again, is fully baked into the pricing that we're charging to our fleet customers, as well as the travel centers around the country. I will say that the state incentives that are in place in the places that I mentioned, that is where the majority of the demand for biodiesel and renewable diesel occur. So about 10 of the 50 states, those which I've mentioned already, is where 95% of the biodiesel and renewable diesel is consumed. Outside of those geographies, customers may have to pay a bit of a premium for biodiesel and renewable diesel depending on where they're at.
As Jim mentioned, these fuels have gotten the most traction in about 10 of the 50 U.S. states. But if you're not in one of those 10 states, you do have options.
Renewable diesel and biodiesel, we sell in 49 to 50 states. The only place we haven't sold biodiesel RD is Alaska to date. It is not available retail in many states that don't have the state incentives that I mentioned previously. So if you're in the Southeast in Alabama or Georgia, you're not going to find biodiesel or renewable diesel at your local truck stop or travel center. But we do make fuel available to bulk fuel customers with their own tank at their distribution centers. We can ship the product directly to your tank. Biodiesel in particular tends to be pretty level cost parity to number 2, ULSD. Renewable diesel, when you get outside of the incentivized states, is still at a bit of a premium, but the costs are coming down as more production capacity comes online, as it becomes more readily available across the country. The price for biodiesel FOB, the production facilities, is pretty near diesel fuel. So they're going to continue to be cost competitive. We're looking for retail partners all the time in places like Georgia and Alabama, state incentives, which certainly help with that. But as people start to look at the total cost of ownership, of reducing their carbon footprint, of reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, people are continuing to look at other options like battery electric and hydrogen and CNG. And when people do the modeling, and we've done this ourselves, still by far the best buck for your return on the opportunity to reduce CO2 in terms of the total cost of ownership per mile is a biodiesel or renewable diesel solution. We'd love to talk to fleets about that.
That's it for this week's 1044. You can read more on ccjdigital.com. While you're there, sign up for our newsletter and stay up to date on the latest in trucking industry news and trends. If you have any questions or feedback, please let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications so you can catch us again next week.